Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with public policy in the great state of Texas. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness. And friends, early voting has started for the Texas primary elections. The Texas Impact team has toured the state and talked with and resourced thousands of Texans of faith, but now it's your turn to participate and to lead. We hope you're utilizing the Texas Faith Votes campaign materials at texasimpact.org. We hope you're sharing the YouTube video of Josh talking about the importance of voting in the primaries. And we hope you're reaching out to your families, neighbors, friends, and congregations and are mobilizing them over the coming weeks. Y'all, what happens over the next few weeks will set the policy direction for Texas for the next 2 years. So the time for waiting and hoping is over, and the time for action is upon us. We do have a lot of great content from the last few weeks, so make sure to check out Texas Impact's website, social media, and YouTube channel. For today, we're going to bring you some of the content from the Houston Faith Votes event earlier this week. We thought you might enjoy the Faith Leaders panel featuring Reverend Dr. Colin Bossen, Senior Minister of First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston, Rabbi Josh Fixler, Associate Rabbi of Congregation Emanu El and President of the Faith Leaders Coalition of Greater Houston, Reverend Leslie Jackson, Texas Impact Board Member and Senior Pastor of St. Peter's United Church of Christ, Kim Mabry, Texas Impact Board Member, and finally, Reverend Dr. Angela Ravin-Anderson, a leader with the Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church Social Justice Ministry. I really enjoyed the conversation and hope you do too. All right, so I realized I didn't introduce myself at the beginning. My name is Scott Atnip, and I am Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and we are so excited to be in Houston and very excited to always start these events with faith leaders talking about the why congregations should engage in the civic engagement work. And I gave them a warning in advance. We are going to use the audio from this panel in our podcast feed, assuming everything works out well. And so I'm going to introduce them. If y'all can just say hey, so folks know who you are. And those listening later will do the same. But first off, we have with us Reverend Leslie Jackson, Senior Pastor at St. Peter United. Leslie, thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
We have with us, as we pass the mic that direction, Reverend Dr. Colin Bossen, Senior Minister of First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston.
Hello, thanks very much for having me.
Thanks for being here. There you go. You can clap. It's all right. We can have some audience participation. We have with us on that end Kim Mabry, Project Manager with Interfaith Ministries of Greater Houston. Kim, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, and now realizing I need to pass this mic that way, we're going to figure this out. Later on, we'll share better. We have with us Reverend Dr. Angela Ravin-Anderson, leader with the Social Justice Ministry at Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church.
Hello.
Thanks for being here.
Good morning.
And last but certainly not least, friend of the program, Rabbi Josh Fixler, Associate Rabbi of Congregation Emanu El and President of the Faith Leaders Coalition for Greater Houston.
Good morning. Good to see you.
All right. I'll now give up the microphone. We'll share going down this direction. But the first question I want to get us started with was, when we do it right, when congregations are doing it well, we are at the center of community life. So what role do you see congregations as playing in encouraging civic engagement, and what does it look like when we do it well? And Rabbi Fixler, since you have the mic on that end, we'll start with you.
Well, I'll start with a story about how my congregation got into civic engagement work, because I think that for me motivates this work. We had done a listening campaign with a bunch of our congregants in 2019, asking them about the issues that they were most concerned about. And the number one story we heard was a story about a feeling of powerlessness, of this feeling like there's so much injustice in the world and I don't know what to do about it. And so we decided to engage in civic engagement work, partially because of what Texas Impact was doing, partially because of what our movement was doing, but mostly because we think that voting is a way to respond to the feeling of powerlessness. If you feel powerless, then remembering that voting is a way you can exercise your power is a response to that. And the very first thing we did was we wanted to get a sense of like where our congregation was on civic engagement. And so we partnered with a congregant who is a professor at Rice University. We did a study of comparing our membership rolls to the voting rolls. And we found out that while about 99% of our congregants were registered to vote, they had voted slightly below the county average in 2018 in the midterm election, about 2 points below the county average. So we realized we didn't want to do any voter registration work, but we had some serious work to do about voter turnout. If we were voting less than 50% of our eligible voters voted, and less than the county average. And so we started engaging in civic engagement work because we realized that that sense of powerlessness was really leading people to give up what power they did have. And I'm proud to say that over the last 3 election cycles, we've been able to swing that. So we voted about 3 points over the county average in 2020 and about 5.5 points over the county average in 2022. And what we have seen is that there is a growing sense amongst people that they do have power and that there are ways that they can speak to the injustice in the world.
Well, for us, I believe one of the things is understanding that civic engagement is not just being political, but that it is actually being biblical. And helping people understand that to be salt and light in the world, that is our call. And exercising our vote is part of being salt and light in the world. That it is our way of ensuring that there will be a moral consciousness in the voting process, and that is expressed both in the individuals that we're hoping to elect as well as legislation that we are supporting. So again, helping people to connect those two dots so that they're not seen as separate components of our lives, but they're really one component. An expression of faith is in how we vote, and that being part of our desire as disciples and followers in our faith. This is a way that we express that in a public way. How we express love, how we express compassion is evidenced in the way that we use our vote and choose to vote. So for us, that's a good piece of the motivation for when you do civic engagement and when it's done well.
I'm going to push you a little further because we were in a meeting with you on Thursday, so I know some things that y'all are doing. Unfair disadvantage for the rest of the group. I know Wheeler Avenue is involved in work recruiting election workers. You talked about Souls to the Poll. Talk about some of those other pieces that you're adding to that civic engagement.
So for us, then for the social justice ministry in particular, then it begins to be how do we equip the congregation once we've connected these two things? How do you equip the congregation to move on that? So for us, we are training individuals to be VDVRs, people who can register others to vote. Our goal is to have 100 people trained within our congregation. Last general election cycle, we got to 85. So we are really hoping that we're going to make it to 100 this year. The reason is then you have people that you can deploy. So we deploy folks. We have voter registration that occurs at the church on almost a weekly basis so that everyone is always available to come and be registered. They can check their registration. But in addition to that, we also have individuals that we send out into the community. We have folks that will go to the libraries and will be at the library on a weekly basis, registering people to vote. We have people that go to restaurants. We have people that go to some other places that we have to, just kind of, they're always like, I never thought I'd see the pastor up in here, but but it's okay because we believe that you go where folks are, and so that's part of it. And then along with the registering and training folks to be VDVRs, we also then have workshops similar to this one that will take place on campus, giving people information about how to vote, where to vote, how to create a voting plan, understanding the issues that are on the ballot. We have people come and explain the issues in details so that people can make informed decisions as they're going through. We hand out, right now we have been in a time of distributing the League of Women voter guides so that people have in their hands the information about the candidates. Of course, we cannot tell anyone who to vote for, but we try to provide every bit of information that a person needs to be an informed voter.
Thank you. When we're not recording, we'll ask her what those other places are, right? Leslie, move in this direction. Same question. What's it look like when congregations are doing it well? Why should congregations be involved in this work?
Well, I think what Wheeler is doing is what is needed and necessary, but I'm thinking about the civil rights movement and how I've personally benefited from all of that work that was done. And I'm also reflecting on Senator Raphael Warnock said a vote is like a prayer. And so I'm one of those pastors that can be a little rough around the edges. So when people come complain to me about things, I say, well, did you vote? I don't want to hear about you're complaining about a policy or this or that and why is God doing this? No, did you vote? So for me, I've encouraged from the pulpit. We're a revitalized congregation. We're the third oldest church in Houston. When I became pastor, we were down to about 10 members and then got up to 200 and then COVID happened and we dropped down to 75 and now we're back at 200. So we're going to be looking for those dollars from Katie so that I can hire somebody on to help us to do the work that we really need to do. But on this idea of a vote being like a prayer, I've encouraged people to understand that, if a vote is like a prayer, we probably have some prayers that have not been answered. And some prayers that we got the answer that we didn't want to get, but that doesn't mean that God is not faithful. And so we have to continue to show up to the polls time and time again as a matter of our faith in action.
So I think I'd actually just sort of bring together the panelists' previous answers and say that there's, I think, two really clear roles for religious communities. One is to be a space where we're telling it like it is, where we're sort of saying what's going on in the world, and providing the theological grounding for our membership and for folks to get out there and vote and engage in civic engagement, right? The great Fannie Lou Hamer, who's a civil rights activist, said that, the role of the pastor is to discern the sign of the times, right? And so, when we're preaching, when we're thinking about how to educate our congregations, we really need to be helping them discern the signs of the time. Then I think that that's a very clear thing for clergy folk. I think that for lay leaders, it's really understanding that churches and religious communities have historically been the laboratories for democracy in this country, right? And so it's not just about voting and getting people out to vote, which is great. It's about, teaching people how to run a meeting. It's about teaching people how to organize and gain the skills for democracy. Because a functioning democracy, like voting, is a thing and it's important, but it's only one little tiny part of it, right? It's the institutions like the labor unions. It's the institutions like Shape Community Center that we partner with that really transform people's lives. And where do people learn the skills to do those things? I mean, I organized several labor unions. How did I learn how to do that? I learned how to run a meeting in my church youth group. Yeah. And so, I could organize 5,000-6,000 people into a labor union using skills that I had gotten in the youth group as a kid. And I think that having that real clarity, we're going to tell it like it is, and we're going to be the laboratories for democracy. That's what our role is.
So I'm going to piggyback on what was just said, because driving into this meeting today, I thought about all the things that are obvious, right? The things that if you're involved with Texas Impact, you know about. organizing voter registration, the things that have been spoken about already, voter engagement. But one thing I hear about a lot from both our board at Interfaith Ministries and throughout the community is just the conflict on the ground, that we do not know how to speak to one another, and that we lack the conversation skills. And when you are in a faith community, you should be learning those. You should not be afraid to have those conversations. And I feel that the worst social norm that we have in our country is that it is impolite to speak about religion and politics in public spaces. When you don't talk about those things, you lack the skill set. And we see the ramifications of that right now. And if we utilize and foster those skills in our faith communities, then we can take those skills outside of these walls and learn how to speak to one another, those that we aren't in prayer with on a daily basis, and learn how to speak civil engagement. That is what our churches, our synagogues, our houses of worship should be teaching us. My most favorite thing that anybody ever said to me, and I consider it a compliment, someone who is as polar opposite from me as I can possibly imagine, and I really want to get this on a t-shirt. He said to me one time, he said, "Kim, I would never want to go on a long car ride with you, but you always make me think." Everybody in our congregations should be walking outside these doors with that label on them, right? We should walk outside and make people think. And all of our faith leaders, regardless of their tradition, should be doing that. So that's what I was thinking about on the way in, like on the ground level, right? Just the basic skill set of civil engagement. On the top, I was thinking about, how many churches, faith communities actually look out at their people and say, how many of you have ever just thought about running for office? How can we support you in that? How many of you are lawyers, have a skill set in public speaking, can help foster that? How can we support you? How can we lift you up? Because as people of faith, you are trained to see the dignity in others. And that's what we need in our faith leaders. And if you have a community behind you that can help you and encourage you, take the baby steps, know what to do, you are powerful. So I would encourage every faith community, if you're doing it well, besides for the obvious, because I was trying to think of something that wasn't as obvious, right? Help your people learn how to have civil conversation outside the walls, number one. And number two, empower people who just have like a seedling of thought to maybe be running for public office.
I'm going to start with Colin this time because I know he loves this question. He's like so excited. He told me when we went through the outline, this was his favorite one. Sarcasm. So I'm just setting you up. It is a polarizing time. And there's a lot of mess going on in the world that needs to be addressed. How do you decide when to speak out on an issue? How do you decide which issues to speak out on? For some of our congregations who think that politics might not have a place in the pulpit. How do you do that?
Okay, so first, my sort of dislike of this question was I really don't like the framing of polarization because I think it smacks of both sidesism, and I think that both sidism is a symptom of having a lack of moral clarity about where we're at in the world. And so, I think especially here in Texas, and I'm a Yankee, so you can all be pissed at me for saying this, but I think that explains. Here in Texas, as a visitor to the heart of the Neo-Confederacy, I think that we need to be very clear about where we are and what's going on. And I think that to engage in both sidesism in that context is just morally irresponsible. Now, I'm a Unitarian, and so I could kind of say that because, like, my tradition is very firmly rooted in, let's say, the left end of the spectrum, right? And so I think that we have a very strong tradition of speaking out from the pulpit in that. I don't have good advice for my colleagues who are perhaps in congregations that are more politically diverse, because that's just not where my tradition sits, right? Like, and I think that, like, one of the reasons why you end up sort of where you end up is because, like, you want that, you know, there's a self-selecting bias within religious traditions and within the U.S. right now that does lead to the polarization, right? So I suppose the other thing that I would say is actually getting to Kim's response is thinking about how we can engage people in other spaces, right? And so, like, how do you have a conversation with somebody at a workplace or in another community group where people are going to be sort of perhaps from a more diverse set of political positions? So anyways, you might not like that answer, but that's...
So I do think that polarization is the proper term. And so I do think we are, my people and in my congregation in particular are, through media and through different things that they see, are being forced to choose or pick a side. And you mentioned Fannie Lou Hamer, and Fannie Lou Hamer did something amazing because she decided to launch a third party, a second party within the Democratic Party, because it was not accepting women and people of color at that time. And so I think that we are in a doom loop of a duopoly that there is some both sidism there in which we are not called to, or we're not presented with the information that allows us to think with complexity and nuance. So there are some things where there are policies that makes sense if we were able to think about it in a sense of not either or, but that there is a both and that is present. But because of the polarization, these two factions that are pulling in these different ways, we're being forced onto plantations of belief that cause us to have issues with people who are opposite from us or think opposite from us. So I think we have to call a thing and understand what we should be thinking about and how these two parties are creating a situation in which we can't think outside of those two political platforms. In terms of me personally speaking to things that are hot button issues, I don't identify as either Democrat or Republican, so I just piss everybody off in the congregation because I think that's what I should do. I think I should be provoking people to think beyond Democrat or Republican and to think with some nuance.
Yeah.
I think for me, as I am trying to lead and make those decisions, I always just try to bring it back to understanding the impact as far as, because you said, how do you kind of choose? There are 1 bazillion things that we can go and stand and protest and shout and stand against. I think the things that I really try to focus our ministry on has to do with those things that really affect the least of these. The scripture talks about us being a voice for those who cannot speak for themselves, a voice for the destitute. So whatever the topic, I'm looking for the least of these in this issue and how they're being impacted. And so raising that level of consciousness around this is the issue for the least of these in this, and how does it affect that? For us, oftentimes that leads us in places, of course, where we're looking at issues around children and those in poverty, and those are the easy places, I guess, sometimes to go. But again, always really trying to understand understand that impact, because that's, again, where we're called more than a party or a person. We're called to serve the least of these.
Not infrequently, it happens that that one of the clergy at Emanu El will give a sermon that talks about political issues, or even one that is like adjacent to political issues, and someone or multiple people will come up to us afterwards and say, "Rabbi, I don't think that politics belongs on the bima," which is our word for the pulpit, on the elevated place where services happen. But rabbi, politics don't belong on the bima. And one of the things I learned to say from our senior rabbi, Rabbi Oren Hayon, is politics comes from a word that means concern for the polis, concern for the community. And in so much as politics is about the concerns of the community, what else is there to talk about from the pulpit but that? What we don't talk about is partisan political, partisan issues. We don't talk about parties, or we don't, the platform of Reform Judaism cannot be the platform of the Democratic Party. But if we're talking about what's happening in our world, then we have to be talking about politics, because politics is the way we shape what happens in our world. There's a commandment that when you build a Jewish synagogue and you build a prayer space, it has to have windows. And the reason it has to have windows is that what happens in the sanctuary has to be about what's happening in the world. You can't shut yourself off to what's happening in the world when you're in the sanctuary. So you have to be able to look at it and engage with it. And how we do that authentically and meaningfully is the challenge. And in terms of how do we pick what to speak about, for me, that dividing line between partisanship and politics is helpful. And the other thing is, I want to, as best I can, always start in the text as opposed to starting in the policy. This isn't about like, I like this particular policy, let me go find a few texts and scriptures that I can use to back up that position. But how do I start in a deep and rich understanding of the text of my tradition? And then what understandings of our community does that lead to? And how do I help people to see these overriding values in the vote that they're casting in the ballot box?
So I have just a follow-up question for you, and maybe for everyone up here, because I think the concern for the least of these, and I think doing great biblical exegesis that is our role. But what I'm noticing is when we lift up concern for the least of these, when we lift up all of our scholarly work that starts in the text, it still comes out that we're picking a political party. Mm-hmm. The decision is still made in some congregants' mind that, Pastor, what you are preaching about is very liberal, or you have taken a conservative stance. When I'm like, no, this is biblical. This has nothing to do with a party platform. So how have you all responded to, or have you gotten that at all?
Yeah, it's really, it's the hardest thing. And it's the hardest thing because the way that issues that I wish weren't partisan in this country are now partisan. We shouldn't take children away from their families and put them in prisons is now a partisan issue. That makes it hard, right? Because some things are going to align with a particular political party. The other thing, and this goes back, I think, a little bit to what Kim said, the other thing that people mean, I think, when they say, hey, Rabbi, I don't want to hear about politics from the Bima, is what they actually mean is I was uncomfortable. And I didn't think that I was coming here to be uncomfortable. What else are you coming here if not to feel pushed and challenged? Amen. Right? And so I think part of what we're doing is cultivating amongst people a willingness to be uncomfortable, a willingness to wrestle with ideas that are outside of sort of what they came in with, and an expectation that's one of the things that is beautiful and wonderful about coming to sacred community. An expectation that, I love that phrase, which was originally about the media, but about afflicting the comfortable and comforting the afflicted. And what does it mean to say, like, when I walk into a congregation, I'm going to experience both, and I know that I'm going to be a better, more whole person because of that experience?
Rabbi, when you tell me that in the Jewish community that people push back at discomfort and questioning, it frustrates me because I have such hope for the Jewish community, because y'all are supposed to be all about curiosity and questioning and midrash. And I'm like, man, if the Jewish community wants black and white, what hope is there? Like, I just feel like the Jewish community, I love how you lean into curiosity, right? And I feel like, as someone who comes from the Christian tradition, sometimes I feel like there is an expectation to have an answer, and that ambivalence is not held. We don't value ambivalence, and yet ambivalence is a sign of growth, right? That you can hold two things simultaneously in tension and move forward holding those. And to me, as a Christian, I'm like, that's kind of who we are, people. The already and the not yet, divine and human, and, not even just touch the Trinity yet. I mean, I'm like, why do we need such certainty all the time? But we come to the faith community for that reassurance. And so when, going back to the question, the political topic, when do we know when to focus on that? I wonder sometimes if maybe we just don't start our services with the understanding that maybe a disclaimer, like maybe we could have like a release form, like you might have some discomfort in the following hour, because then maybe they might get it. And then we have permission to go forward.
So for us at Wheeler Avenue, I'm sure if you're here from Houston, you understand that our church grew up in the civil rights era. And so our church has a strong, it's part of the DNA of who this church is. But I have to say right now is a time where what we call the voice of the prophetic is very profound right now. In many, particularly Black churches, Black Baptist churches, there is a raising of the voice of the prophetic. Meaning, when we talk about the voice of the prophetic, what did the prophets do? They held up the mirror to the people and said, look at what you're doing, and look at how this is falling below the standard of where God is calling us to be. So the fact that there are times when there are things that are going to be raised that will make folks uncomfortable, will make them say, I don't really want to hear that. That's part of the role that we stand in right now. If we're going to move forward to be the people that God is calling us to be, we have to have that mirror held up to say, this is where we're falling short. These are the opportunities for us to rise to the level that where God wants us to be as we are interacting with each other. Redemption and salvation is not about just about the not yet, but it is about the kingdom that is at hand right now, what we are to be experiencing right now with one another. So how do we begin to live into that right now? So yes, sometimes there will be issues that are going to be raised and you may not agree, but lifting up, again, as faith leaders, we have to hold up the scriptures and say, this is the scripture standard. This is where we are. And there's misalignment. Yes.
So as someone who lives and works and breathes in the interfaith world, but then also comes from a Christian tradition, I hear what you say that it's biblical, but then we have to remember that it's interpretation, right? And so I hear faith leaders say often, well, it's biblical, it's grounded in scripture, but it's interpretation, right? Because interpretation for one person means something very, very different, right? And as interfaith ministries, we do a lot of refugee resettlement. And the two ends of refugee resettlement and the work that we do in that are very, very different. And so, I'm up here as Kim Mabry and a board member of Texas Impact, but I am not here as Interfaith Ministries. I am someone who happens to work there, okay? Because of the spectrum of people who donate to Interfaith Ministries and the work that we do, and I cannot jeopardize that. I am here as an independent person of faith who has the privilege to hear the interpretation of the amazing books of faith in our community. But it always comes down to interpretation. So to say that something is biblical, I probably am completely in line with you. I listened to NPR on the way in this morning, and Pastor Lawson was highlighted this morning for Black History Month. I don't know if you know that, but his story was highlighted this morning. And so your faith community is founded in the biblical principles that I stand by. You aren't crucified on a cross for not being political, right? You don't make history for not being political. But again, it comes down to interpretation. And that goes back to what you originally said. Does your interpretation protect the least of these? And that's where I would question the lens of love is what has historical significance and really test test time, right? And I think propels you to the right side of history. And maybe pushing back on that. But I agree with everything you said. I just always kind of flinch when people say it's biblical because I'm like, yeah, but everybody can say that.
First of all, thank you all. Good conversation. I loved looking out in the room today, and there are a bunch of clergy who are sitting in here, and I saw some amens and some head nods for a good chunk of that conversation. This is hard, right? This is hard. And this is going to be a hard year. There is, in our communities, in our congregations, in the world, 2024 is going to be a challenging year in so many ways. And we're going to spend the next couple of hours talking about voting, talking about effective advocacy, talking about some issues that are going to be prevalent during this election cycle. But the folks in the room are, I hope, committed to doing work to bring about a better Texas, to bring about a better bring about a better world. And one of the reasons I like to do these faith panels first is for y'all to give them a challenge, for you to send them home with maybe a word of inspiration or a word of challenge. So let's do it. What do y'all hope folks in the room will leave with here today? What Josh always makes fun of me because I always say homework, but what homework do you have for folks? What challenge do you have for folks as they return to their homes today?
One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is that in my community, people don't vote not because they don't know that it's important, but because they get busy or they get overwhelmed or the day comes and and it passes them by. We had a group of people who were calling congregants. We called over 500 congregant houses in the 2022 election, and afterwards we had a little reception for them. And someone raised their hand and said, "This was great, and I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I made phone calls, but it was silly because everyone I talked to said that they had either already voted or they had a plan to vote and they were going to vote. So why bother calling these households?" I said, "I don't know what to tell you, but about 48% of them were wrong." Right? Because I've seen the numbers, so I know. But I think they really did think they were going to vote, plan to vote. And so I recognize there is a ton of privilege in that statement. There are other communities that are experiencing voter suppression in a way that my community isn't. But it's hard and scary to vote. I was told by this same political science professor we partner with that Texas has not only the longest ballots in the country, but the longest ballots of any democracy in the world. So people gotta go prepared for that, right? They gotta go knowing all the policy issues. They gotta go knowing all the candidates, right? They gotta and I love the work that you're doing to prepare them for the policy stuff, because they're gonna they have to get to the end of the ballot, and if they have the courage and stamina to get to the end of the ballot, then there's some really important stuff there that they probably need to have done some research on. So it is difficult to vote, because it is for a myriad of reasons, and partially because there are people in the state trying to make it even more difficult to vote. But one of them is just because it's hard to be an informed voter. And so my challenge to all of you is, what is the work that your congregation can be doing to help make sure that the people within your congregation are informed voters? Congregations are speaking institutions. We are speaking all the time. We have a weekly bulletin. We have emails that go out to our preschool families. We have sermons. We have High Holy Day programming. We have all of that. And what we try to do with our Emanu Votes campaign is try and utilize as many of those places where we are already speaking to remind people that it's a Jewish value to vote. And so putting that in the weekly email, putting it in our High Holy Day announcements, putting it in our sermons, so that wherever people are tuning into the ways the congregation is communicating, we are including the message that it's a Jewish value to vote.
So I think a couple of things. One, I really want to figure out how we can connect with your guy at Rice, because that is amazing. And that would be, I don't know if this is possible, but a service that you could provide or help other communities connect with, because
my understanding is that Texas Impact wants to be doing a lot of that for congregations.
Yeah.
That some of what we've been able to do with our congregant is some of what Texas Impact is building their capacity to do for other congregations, because it does need to happen at scale.
Yeah. So, I think that's a big challenge for my folks here, is just to connect then with that work that Texas Impact is doing. I guess I want to say that on some level, also the question is, what about November? I guess it's 8th. I don't remember what the Wednesday after the election is, but we have such a habit in this country of focusing so much on elections, and voting, of course, is tremendously important. But the day after the election will happen, and your side, if you have a side, will either win or lose. And what are you going to do that next day? And I guess I want to I think that maybe my statement about moral clarity got perceived perhaps as speaking about one of the particular parties, but I've only voted for one of the mainstream parties twice in my life. So I think that it's important to understand that people who are, say, more inclined to think about themselves as aligned with the Democrats, Barack Obama deported more people than any other president in the United States. So to Josh's point about people putting children in cages and engaging in family separation, having more clarity about I don't want to see mass deportation, means saying, well, actually, I think that the Democrats' compromise policy on the border is morally outrageous, and that actually, it's not about this party or that party. It's about what is the principle, right? The Democratic Party in the state of Michigan, there are reasons why they lost in 2016, and that had a lot to do with policy choices that they made and the way that people in the UAW felt about those policy choices, right? So it's not about Democrat or Republican. It's about what is the moral principle and having clarity about that. And the reason why I push back on the polarization is the moral principle is the moral principle. It's not about which side is on the moral principle. Because, frankly, the Democrats and the Republicans represent two different segments of the ruling class. And if you follow the money, there's being funded by different industry sectors, right? You got big tech behind the Democrats, you got oil and gas behind the Republicans, and I want to see a society where we're not run by industrialists. That's what I want to see.
Amen. Yeah, you agree. I just want to press.
So I think my homework is a little bit easier. Mine is just a little bit easier. And mine would just be to ask that at each congregation that there is some action that's taken that helps to engage folks, raise their awareness about what's going on, whether it's sharing the dates for election, whether it's having people register to vote, whether it's having a conversation, politics and pancakes, and sitting down and talking, an opportunity to talk about the issue or whatever, bringing in someone like folks from Texas Impact to talk about issues. I just think it's an opportunity just to raise consciousness in your space. Just one action that you would be willing to go back and implement in your space.
So I'm going to share something that I did, and this is easy homework. I want all of you tonight to look through your phone and scroll through your phone and check every single person who has someone in college. If anybody in your phone has someone in college, you call them or text them and see if their person in college is registered to vote. Because if they were registered for the last election, it doesn't matter. They have to re-register every time. And just because you're registered to vote, that doesn't mean that you can vote, right? You have to register to be absentee. Then you have to, it's like a whole thing. So figure out how to do it through Texas Impact, and then make a list of everybody in your phone who has college students and help them. Send them an envelope with the form in it. Give them a stamp if you have to. I literally did that. I put a stamped envelope in my friend Elena's mailbox to send to Isaiah, who is up at Rutgers. Okay, do that, and that is huge. Make sure everybody in your phone who has college students away, that they are registered to vote, and realize that it is a multi-step process. And do it by the end of Lent. Most of y'all are Christian. I recognize most of y'all as Christian. Even if you're not, when Easter happens, there's flowers and stuff. So just make that a goal, okay? Every college student in your phone or relation of by Easter is registered to vote.
And we'll have some tools for you at lunch today that'll help you do just that and checking all the registrations. Leslie, close us out.
Well, there's a lot. I think it's been very valuable to have this dialogue and discussion for reason that we're trying to do this thing. We're trying to encourage voting. We're trying to encourage civic engagement. And I think dialogue and understanding and noticing our nuance and complexity, and if there's disagreement or trying to figure out where that exists, is important. And so I tend to sometimes provoke things. And so I also want to lift up that when we are dialoguing, if people are using a certain language, it's really important to think about culturally why that individual may be using that language, such as biblical. So in my community, it's highly important that I minister to people in a way that gives them language that's similar from what they come from, that hurt them. So I have to create a narrative in which biblical is part of their narrative and their language so that they can deal with their families who tell them that, no, they're not biblical. So sometimes that kind of language comes out. So as we're dialoguing, we have to also remember cultural competence and difference and how that may show up when we're talking to each other. That being said, the biblical idea for me is that from Genesis to Revelation is about God's salvation for all of humanity, and that is what God wants for all of us. So what's Bible for me is over in James, where it says faith without works is dead. And so that means it's important for us to help our people understand it's not just about faith to get a fatter pocketbook. It's not just about faith to get a bigger home. It's not just about faith to get that Benz. It's about faith that will change life for all of us and create a thriving community for all of us, because that, I believe, is biblical and God's plan for salvation for everyone, regardless of their spiritual background or religion or faith. So, thank you.
Amen. Who's ready to get to work? Hey, one more time, thank you all for the time this morning. Thanks for the message. Thanks for the challenge. We appreciate each of you. I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with the Houston Faith Votes Faith Leaders panel. And y'all, I don't know what else to say to close out this episode other than I hope that you're feeling inspired and equipped. The panel and all of the speakers we've hosted so far this year have challenged the faith community to actively engage. And I know we're up for it. If you have questions or need more information or resources, please reach out. You can always catch me at scott@texasimpact.org. We also have a ton of resources on the website at texasimpact.org. While you're there, I hope you'll support this podcast by subscribing and sharing it and by joining Texas Impact as a member. All right, I think that's about enough for today. So with that, I think it's time to close out this episode. So remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.